Okay. Hello, everyone. I would like to speak about sincere administration in the self of selves. I want to experience about how life can move towards a simpler occurrence and, in some sense, holding within it more of a complex quality. You see, it's as if we human beings are journeyers, and when we wake up in the day, the journey has already begun. When my eyes were opened, the missions of this life were briefed to me. Ultimately, I have tried to interpret human behavior in various contexts, in various approaches, and I've kind of realized that there is a creative process that makes us feel something progress throughout the day. It's as if change is happening, but when we become conscious of it, we call that progress. And so in this life, something in my youth that was, I had escaped. I don't want to say I had escaped, that had escaped me, that I had missed. One of those inner realizations, inner things a human being should notice I had missed, that I had been raised in an environment that I had felt the simpler versions of myself were not authorized existence. And so what it is that I find every human being is like a unique Rubik's Cube. And in some sense, once they find the algorithm to how their intelligence works, there is a simplicity that harbors within it greater complexity. What that means is the simpler the reaction of the general, the more intenser the command comes across. And so it's sincere administration. It's how the human being has separated the sense of self through a linear sense of time. That means the human being is wondering about, oh man, what about my past? What about all the things I did? And then the human being looks at the future and it's like, who will I be in the future? How will I walk in the future? How will the world receive me in the future? And so what it is it's kind of like how a person starts a business and thinks about the short run and long run projections of their business. What does that mean? That means you are in the business of living, of human living. And this sense of humanity, it is animating in two ways: that definitions of the world that your eye extracts, and there are definitions of the world where I find your eye finds itself in. There has been many moments that I felt I was correct only to see I was wrong. I felt I was wrong only to see I was correct. And I looked at the skies and I was like, life, what are you doing? Only to recognize that I am choosing the context of how concepts move for me. And that's the thing. Many human beings can be responsible for the concept, for who they are, for their identity. But can you be responsible for your context of living? Can you see the world as more than just an image on a screen, but as the sound of your own heartbeat? It was an invalidation of the simpler self. At least that's what I experienced in my youth. I felt that what I was by nature was not okay, and it had to constantly be recalibrated to the opinions of a world that would never see me like how my eyes would. So that was there. There is a moment. There is a moment. I forget what movie it is, but there's this guy in this movie scene, and he's getting angry, and he's shouting, and he's like, "You need to get angry." And he says some things. I don't remember exactly the wording, but he says, "I'm a human being. God damn it!" Like he shouts at the end. And what is he shouting? He's shouting that there is a certain melody, a certain pace to nature. And once there is deviations from that nature, it's as if the mind of man is gravitating to the chaos that it has tried to avoid. I have found no better way to function in this plane of existence than remembering how the simpler eyes of my being motivated my actions. And this doesn't mean the world doesn't change you. The world changes you a lot of times. And the whole point of sincere administration is that at first you as a human being don't know what you are, and you are trying to seek your value outside of yourself. And when you seek your value outside of yourself for many years, for many laps around the sun, you will notice that at the end of the day, nobody has the eyes of thee. Nobody has your eyes, and there is a strange advantage and disadvantage. The advantage is now that you have something to share with your world, the uniqueness of your own origin to view. We don't only name objects, we also name the movement of objects. In other words, we acknowledge the change of the objective universe subjectively in a universe that is flexible and malleable to our own containment. I feel that what the mind is, it is a room inside a room, granting access to various variations and multidimensional expression of the room. So what the mind is that it is not an object, and what the mind is it is not a subject. It is the administrator. It is the presence, the simple presence of all complex phenomena in your universe. And so there is an authenticity lacking from the cities of this world. You know, we are conditioned to be in a world that we, how would I say it? It's like if somebody came up to you and asked you, who is building your world? You will see that your attention to others leads to a certain range of values for your moment. But there is certain values that arise to you from your attention to yourself. That's what I noticed. No teacher in my schooling and university ever looked at me and said, "Hey, who are you behind your eyes, and are you willing to show it?" There was never. How can I tell you? The world is lost in its own picture, and there's some beings who they may think it's suffering, but it's a blessing to suddenly snap out of this picture. I remember in summers I would go visit the country I was born in, Iran, and sometimes my family, my large family, would go outside of Tehran, the city, and we would go to the outskirts, sometimes in village areas where it was much more greener and the air was less polluted. And I remember my family went, and we came to this unique mountain where we went up there, and there was a village, and that village only had like a mosque and like a bunch of stores, and that's it. A bunch of houses, and that's it. And I remember seeing the people there, and I remember seeing the face of the people in that village when we had entered that village, when we and like my family had gone there to kind of visit. And there was something unique, there was something so purely simple about a being that has accepted where they are. I remember seeing an old man, and this old man, he had these prayer beads in his hand, and he was wearing a suit, the best suit to his ability. And then when he entered the moment, he was just friendly. And I realized we by nature, the same way in so many movies and stories, we see the themes that human beings sacrifice themselves. I kind of saw in that moment, it was as if that man was sacrificing his ego to see a new world. And so to have an ego, to have an identity, to have a claim to a set of language as your face is a flaw. That humanity is built for greater visions. And this civilization is not the one we deserve, it is just the one we have. The one we deserve is an advanced civilization. And I call that civilization 2.0, a yin-yang civilization, a civilization that no longer is obsessed with having individuals be in a certain shape, but begins to acknowledge all human beings as having two potentials and two pathways. When we look at everything you have ever been taught, in your reality, it is held in language, and language is held in dualism and reference. That means we cannot speak about things that are not separate from one another. And that's the uniqueness of the world, that our approach in articulating our self-awareness is the limitations, is the edges of the room. That it's not just our sensory perception that is limited. I will tell you this. There has been two worlds that I have found myself required to acknowledge as a human being. There is the responsibility of administering the content of experience, where I playfully say that is behind your eyes, that is within you, that is in another sense your subjective and inner realms. So that is one world you need to learn to administer and handle. Then there comes the external world where you cannot handle, you can only participate in. When I speak about civilization, when I speak about humanity, when I say this 4 billion-year-old science project requires to be attended to, and it deserves the newest eyes. That means there will come a day where we human beings will see the value of a new idea. We will see the value of the eyes of the children of the future generations, and we will live for them. We will protect them. And let me tell you what it is. We are not. I feel 2020. Sorry, guys, my voice is a bit off today. Until it turns back on, let's continue. Most people are living for their inner realms. Because if they were not living for their inner realms, the most important action would be to see what is beyond them. For me, when I see, for example, I don't know, there was something very serene about this wallpaper that I chose for this talk. When I look at this wallpaper, I see the simplicity of human beings, that what we think is the complexity of human living by nature was designed to be as simple as a plant. You know, we are just the tree that is conscious of the way it's growing, and it can have opinions on the way it's growing. But if you didn't have a mind, you would perhaps be like a plant, like nature. But because we have a mind, because we have limbs that in some sense can walk the earth, we have established a relationship within ourselves with the earth that is like the second earth. So you can say the first earth is objective, the second earth is subjective, and that subjectivity can change instantly. That means the same way a person holds a pen in their hand and they write something, the same way they are piloting their attention and therefore perceiving their plane of existence. I have had very playful kind of dialogues with the logos of nature. And what I would consider that is ways that my mind's movement was a way of communicating to itself. That means we right now think that communication is limited to language. It is limited to having like stations where the communication can be projected and received. We are right now, I can say playfully, in the express and receive era. We are right now fascinated about expressing things and receiving things, and a lot of life is being administered by that. You know, and some people may ask, what is the grandest thing you can receive? You know, some people say wealth is objectively, but subjectively it is love. But what is love? And love is the, I think it is, I don't know, of course it is not something that can be defined. It's an attraction at most. It's like puzzle pieces that fit in, you know. The poet Rumi says, your task is not to seek love, but to get rid of all the barriers you have made against it. And so that's the approach where the human being, once they wonder about the purpose of life, they see it's pretty much energy conscious of itself and it can direct itself. For me, I was thinking, if fish became conscious, would they be curious about if there was anything outside of water? Imagine a fish born in a pool, in a sea. Ah. The fish born in the ocean has no clue what is beyond the ocean. For it, there is no grander existence than the ocean. Okay? Now, we human beings look at that fish in the ocean where we're like, yo, fish, you have no idea about the skyscrapers we've built outside of the ocean. And that fish has no conception, no fathomability. It is limited to the fluidity of its life. And so I thought, what if human beings were like the fish? What if we are all, the ocean for human beings is space? And what if this space at times has currents, but beyond this space, there are greater dimensions, you know? And I feel that the greater dimension doesn't mean it's explainable. It doesn't mean just because you're in one room of a house, you can explain how the whole house looks like based on that room. I feel, of course, that as much as man goes towards the division and conquering of his universe in subjectivity, language also takes steps towards man. And I feel the uniqueness is that just like how Michelangelo said, I saw the angel in the stone and I set it free. Similarly, it's as if human design was perceived in manifestation. That means in meaningless atoms there was complexity, a unique complexity, you know. And so we are the angel in the stone of this vast void. We are on a rock in the middle of nowhere wondering about what we are. You know, our knowledge can potentially all be hollow. Everything, every attempt at knowing something can be hollow, because if there are greater dimensions, the world is not kept in the same way. It's as if you're looking at the world from 90 degrees and then you look at it from 180 and then 360, and then you're shocked as there has been a full circle of various perceptions in the lifetime. And some person can have a relationship as if they're a particle in a field, or I personally experientially have had a relationship where I am a field in the field moving the particle. And whenever you become the field in the particle, in my talks I explain that as these creative rhythms. You know, these creative rhythms, as if suddenly your ears open up to the symphony that is being played behind the veils of the cosmos, and then you recognize that you're moving in accordance to it. Your whole life is a mystery of your next step. You know, the way society is built currently, civilization is built, is that it's inspiring people to be conquerors. But the conqueror state of mind has limitations. And there's this very profound story where this warlord, just a second, guys. This warlord back in the day, he doesn't like monks. He thinks they're wasting time. He thinks they're a nuisance, you know. He goes on in this savage mindset and he commands all his soldiers to, in some sense, destroy every monk they see, to eradicate the monks. And so as this happens, one day this warlord, as he's going, and all the monks hear this and they start running to the mountains, you know. But one day the warlord suddenly notices he's walking with his army, you know, and he goes, and suddenly one of his generals comes to him and says, "Hey, warlord, we have a problem." And the warlord's like, "Excuse me, I'm a warlord. How do we have a problem?" You know. And the warlord is told by the general that there's this very old monk that is decided not to run to the mountains, and he has stood on the grasslands, you know, of this temple, and he's not moving, and he's just in this simple, graceful meditation, and no soldier wants to kill this monk. That means, here's the cool thing: a warlord may be heartless, but it doesn't mean his army is. And what does the warlord do? You know, the warlord says, "Take me to this monk. How dare this monk, you know, not understand what wrath is coming to him." And so what happens is that the warlord finds himself there with his whole army and entourage behind him looking, you know, and the warlord sees the monk in the grassland, and he grips his sword, the handle of his sword, you know, with such hate and anger, like as if it's like burning rage. It's as if like he's so angry, lava's about to pour out of him, you know. And so he shouts and he says, "Monk, stand up!" You know, the monk stands up, opens his eyes gently, and the monk is strangely, like, internally smiling. And the monk goes up, you know, and the warlord says, "Come here, monk." You know, the monk comes. Excuse me. The warlord walks closer to the monk. His hand is gripping again. His sword is about to be released. You know, he's about to release a slingshot of chaos, you know, a slash of chaos. And he goes to the Zen master, to the old monk, and says, "Monk, do you know who I am? I can have my sword in your stomach in an instant." When he says it with such hatred and savageness, it's like, "I'm going to eradicate you," you know. And the monk says something that not only do all the soldiers get shocked, as if they've suddenly become alert, but the warlord, the savage, ruthless conqueror, he can't release his sword. And the moment the warlord says, "I can have my sword in your stomach in an instant. Don't you know who I am? I can have my sword in your uh, stomach in an instant." The Zen master looks at the warlord and says, "Don't you know who I am? I can have your sword in my stomach in an instant." And he smiles. And so this warlord sees the fearlessness of the presence of a being that has dared study who they are. And he realizes he has been killing the void. You see, life is a vast, massive happening. The easiest way to explain life to children is like, it's something that's happening, and you're part of it, and you are the captain of your own ship. And there will come moments where you must enter collective frameworks, where it means society and civilization will only advance in the tolerance and charity of human beings. Let me tell you why. Because in that space, there is enough permission for the genius of the future generations to do its work. You see, for me, I'll be honest, it's a bit savage. There are many things on this planet I see, and I have no choice but not to care for. I've realized that if you want to see problems, there's endless. So then, after you have access to an endless landscape of problems and challenges, then comes the prioritization of it. And then for a long time, I was prioritizing my life as a being just based on my inner realms. It was as if I'm telling you that most people who get acquainted to spirituality, it's a permission for them to escape confronting their reality in its natural image. But it takes it's like your heart is big if you can watch the world change without changing, you know, without your nature changing, because action can define you. You know, I have found myself engaging life through various orbs of narrative. I feel that to treat life like a simulation is not ignorance, it is yet a mysterious wisdom. You see, life is kind of like in one state of mind when the free will is in the driver's seat. You are an artist. That means truth is not to be found, it's to be built. It's to be, you have to design. Not, and I don't want to say you have to build it. I'm just saying that, like, when life is an empty page where it appears to the free will as such, it feels it's the movement in the space, and therefore it can dictate the meaning of the space in accordance to its movement. So I'm kind of saying it's like we're reaching a point as sophisticated human beings in recognizing that the ultimate value of the individual life is its collective participation, and the ultimate value of the collective life, which is humanity or civilization, is the individual. So can you imagine the members of a civilization running and living to serve their civilization, and their overall civilization's primary focus is to serve the human being? It's as if we are in a symbiosis uh, uh, with mystery, and that's the self of selves. This, you see, your first self. Like, if I ask you who you are, and you have a response, you have any idea in your mind, you see, that's the first self. Then there is always the regression of the experiential witness of the objective and subjective existence. That regression will eventually be reverse engineered to a moment before your memory subjectively pushed itself. Before, so you're, it's like there's it's like the soul, the clarity of the soul is found when you have journeyed back before your first memory on this conscious plane of existence, in this world of ours. I feel all that human beings have been able to do is access data and process it, and the way they process it changes the data, and that's it. And on some level, this may sound very strange, but we may never, as beings, be able to see what the physical world is. We may think that we're seeing the physical reality, but if you take into consideration that consciousness is like a chemical, and the world is the self is a chemical, and the world is a chemical, and the act of living is a chemical reaction. In a chemical reaction, both chemicals are changed. In other words, the observer effect that we consider denies us access to the actual experimental results. I'm pretty much saying the act of sight is a transformation of the scene. That means the moment light hits an object and enters your eyes, that object is not the object anymore. It is an infusion. It is an infusion of mind and matter in the dance of eons. And that's the thing. You got to work with your own intelligence, which it means you got to look at your self of selves in the mirror. And the only way you look at it is by finding the mirror of existence, as poetically I say. What is the mirror of existence? It is a moment where you can trust what is before you anything done. In my writings, the logos, or I would say, like the logos, by the way, when I use that, that's a concept brought forth by the ancient Greeks and specifically Heraclitus, and it's the implication that back in the day, in ancient times, the gods had not been erased. And what that means is the universe spoke within every individual as their mind. It's as if suddenly the person wondered, who am I? And they saw how their day happened was the answer. And it's as if the universe is speaking through the eyes of man to a man who has been able to perceive the multidimensionality of selfhood. There is a quote by Hafez, this poet. He says, "Bring your neck out of that dark nest in which you hide. I will pour effulgence into your mind." And he meant, do not underestimate the novelty that will transform your overall vision of reality. We are not creatures that are shackled to the past like blind titans, and we are not gods that have been so, that, how can I tell you, that have traveled so far into the future. The only way is to travel back, as if we have reached the mountain peak of time only to see the timeless. And the timeless is a sky where you cannot climb with conceptual feet. It is, in some sense, you need non-dual wings. I've practiced this a couple of times. It's something I've been working on, but have not for now found a way to systemize to share with the public. But it is something on my mind. So I was wondering about, like, you see, there's concepts of like there's a concept in spiritual circles where they say the person is out of their body. For example, whirling dervishes, they went through some sort of ecstatic love with the beloved. That was their whole moment, that they felt out of, they were, their attention was literally the whole room, and their body could endlessly whirl. So it's another way of saying that human beings, we are chemicals urging for an ultimate chemical transformation. And that chemical transformation is how experience moves through existence. I notice what I was denied, and I feel all the children being raised in our civilization are being denied, is an ability to look at the alphabet. You see, it's like with civilization, your structures of meaning, you might not believe it, but they're made in like an alphabet, because the human being experiences itself as the passage of selves. So if we say life is a line, imagine we draw an arrow from left to right, point A to, just B or whatever, you know, So this arrow, it's like when you look at this line, a line is made of tiny dots, and it's as if like your lifetime, the line of the arrow of your lifetime, this line of a lifetime is literally like all the various selves you've been as you've endured through this time and space continuum. Okay, hopefully this isn't on mute. Okay. Hands are not just given so we can find stuff. I find by nature we are, for example, there was this show, Japanese kind of show that, I don't know. There was this show where all the species of a type of kind of human being they were called a warrior class species, a warrior species. And I was kind of looking at humanity, and I was like, in what way would I classify it? And we are a designer species. We are not a warrior species. We are a designer species. That means once the mind attains its own pace, its genius will trust the world. The logos told me there are libraries behind every person's eyes. It's just their choice if they want to. It's only how much a human being cares that they will externalize. Do you know most of people's lives is internal? That means if you looked at them from like a dove, white dove flying in the air, you would see, for example, that the human being is just this object that moves to different locations on this two-dimensional surface. Do you know? We're just, we are creatures that move, and there's silence a lot of our moments because it's an inner movement of our being. And when we become aware of that inner movement and we stop letting that inner movement constantly be defined by the conditions of the external, when you realize you're not a thought, it's like you'll find a strange moment where all thoughts are bowing. All thoughts bow to you simply because you have realized the wisdom of the untouched, the wisdom of not having a search in the void, yet to, how can I tell you? It's the joy, they call it Satchidananda in Vedic circles, where it ultimately means the moment you realize uh, you are conscious of existence or existence is conscious, there is a bliss there. There is a bliss in the miraculous empty space that the free will can access to innovate. So, Mr. Within is saying the educational system is lacking teaching children about their inner life and its constitution and its design. And so when I say we're a designer species, I'm saying that every person, literally, when they wake up, are having access to designs, and their free choice is how they choose. And so it's as if they said 25 years of the human being's life is required to be dedicated to being a student. Why? Why was that said? That was said because the human being is a unique being. Nobody has your DNA, and if and nobody can see these things the way you do. When you realize this, you're like, okay, nice. We're living in a world where there's clones. oh man, there's something just remarkable about design that for me sometimes, you know how people say, you know, they see a light at the end of the tunnel. That light at the end of the tunnel I see is a geometrical dimension. It's as if like the mind gives you space to see. And when you appreciate your inner space, then your outer space, then karma doesn't exist. Karma only exists when the external realm is still, excuse me, when the inner realm, when the subjective realm and the objective realm are still fragmented. So even though I say inner and outer realm, there is a state of mind that is the attributeless witness of all. That attributeless witness is beyond the language threshold, so literally I can't speak about it. You know, it's like somebody asking you, it's like, kind sir, can you please tell me where the edge of the sky is? Ultimately, it's a game of language evocation. I say it's the grand war of languages. You know, human beings were fighting over objective phenomena. Now they're fighting over subjective phenomena, and one day they'll realize they're all eyes of the same field of being. And when that day comes, it's as if the mind is. Oh, I forgot to mention. I was saying the logos kind of in my writings that had come, that it was as if the mind, like your body, is going from the past to the future. Your mind is going from the future to the past. And what that means is there's a simultaneity of two lives being lived. That means you are living a life, and just like antimatter, there is an anti-life simultaneously going on. You know. So that means our minds are two sides of a coin, and in one side of the coin, individual consciousness, and in another side, it's a collective consciousness or collective unconscious. So the greatest thing that is like one thing I would kind of tell Carl Jung if he was alive, where I would definitely ask him, would I would say, do you feel the collective unconscious is intelligent? Is it alive? And he would say it is where our life, our conscious mind defines itself. So that means whether you like it or not, because you are an intelligent being, your mind can see intelligence everywhere. That is why a young child plays with a toy, and that toy has a personality in their mind. This is why all those people who play those board games, those massive board games, like that take a couple hours to play, like those fantasy board games, those people in their minds are kind of living the game. Do you see? And so human beings are not just experiencing their reality throughout the day, but they're also experiencing their imagination, which is the stretching of their reality in accordance to their inner dimensions. So, for example, I see a cup of coffee in front of me, and then I, for example, start visualizing like a galaxy inside this cup of coffee, you know? And so that visualization of the galaxy is arising from my inner realms, but the object is in the external realm, in the outer realm. So I'm saying that it's like not only do we need to be conscious that there's an objective way that life is happening, there's a subjective way life is happening, but there's ultimately the presence, a presence of an attention that is cannot be in time because it is so instantaneous. That means there is a straight line between how energy is conscious of itself. Consciousness and energy are instant. They are instantaneously arising. Because they're instantaneously arising, it means the first reference point, it's like without your name, you are no one. That's an example of a early reference point. I feel that many times in my life, pretty much the experience of the day has been like get access to a certain range of sight and then implement or allow effort. And that effort to live, if the person is conscious of it from the moment they wake up, there is a strange joy. I think it's the joy of witnessing harmony, a sort of rhythm to the day. Ah, I remember I had attended when I was very young in Iran this giant family gathering, like everybody suits and ties and just like very huge living room, a family member, and there was like I don't know, maybe like 100 chairs in one giant space. And so people were all sitting down in their most fanciest kind of outerwear. And there were, I remember kind of getting up, and I remember they had brought me a cup of tea. It was like life is so funny sometimes. Like they had brought me a cup of tea where I saw the cup. There was lip marks on the cup of tea, the fresh cup of tea they had brought for me. So I took the cup of tea to go back, and I remember it was like literally like the lesson of a lifetime, the unique moment of lifetime, where it was as if I experienced this kind of aristocratic vibe, and then I suddenly, that cup made me go back, and I went back to the back of the house, and I went to the kitchen, and I saw all the staff there working and cleaning, all the maids of the household cleaning, and I saw there was this old man washing these cups of tea that they would bring back, these used cups of tea, and the old man wasn't washing them. He was just rinsing it with water. And I was like, I remember seeing that, and I also remember the moment I stepped in that room, there was a strange sense of simplicity that was okay. It was as if in a sort of aristocratic vibe, a certain complexity must be attempted, but in a simpler vibe, it's as if when people are not trying to be something, they are already what they are. So the simplicity can be felt. When a person is not trying to be more than they are. You know, this is why the servants of this world have lesser egoic strongholds around them. So I remember going there, and I remember even some of the maids were laughing. So it was like even like when I was at the gathering, it was, how can I tell you? There was strictness, and people were trying to be something in front of each other. But in there was a simplicity. The maids were laughing, and eventually I went and told them, I'm like, "What is this, man? You can't clean this like this." And so then one of the maids changed. One of it was, and it was funny, guys. I'm telling you, the quality of work and employment is the vibe the employee is in. It's the vibe the employee is in, guys. I'm telling you that if you're whoever is listening to this, you're running a business, run your employees and actually see what emotion they have when you. Because that man who was cleaning the cups, it was as if he was emotionless, and I could totally see. Being a like late 50-year-old man washing cups, and a young kid coming there and asking about the efficiency of you washing these cups, I could totally see. It's like sometimes even if you're not of the same world, you can feel the pain of other worlds from a distance. You know it's like someone else is suffering. It's like it's very distant kind of gusts of wind of a nuclear explosion in the distance happening that hits you. You notice there's something wrong, you know? And so the moment I said this, I realized it was kind of like, I mean, of course, I didn't realize it then. At that point, I was just this simple kid. It's like, sir, can you please, you know? And uh, I didn't have the same comfort of mind as I have now. I'm telling you, it took me like 20 years to get comfortable with my mind, with my own mind. But anyways, so it changes. This lady who was laughing and joking around, that was in a much more happier vibe. She comes and starts cleaning the things, and they make sure she cleans it with a sponge rather than rinsing it. So the cups are now clean, you know. And it was a strange way because I could have sat there and just looked at the cup and be like, I don't feel like drinking tea. I don't even care, you know. And so, but there was something that because I cared, I got access to other dimensions, you know. And it's the same thing with not just institutions in our world, but also with people. That means if you really don't care for someone, that means you don't care for their mind's existence. Hence, they are non-existent to you, you know. And that's when the decency is shattering and it must be protected or something. You know, we need to create backup systems of human decency. The world is a fascinating place because many actions are many originations of action are seeing their consequence. That means many intelligent beings that are causing things also are getting access to the effect of how they cause things. For example, when you speak to someone, you see the effect of what you have said to them based on their facial gesture. So, so there is in everything a cause and effect. And when you realize there has to be two mentalities cultivated, two skills in this life, you have to be comfortable starting new things, and you have to be comfortable at the same time seeing things stop. And when you master these two modes of thinking, you know, or not even modes of thinking, these modes of perception, you're going see if something stops in your reality, it no longer jumps into a narrative of failure and, oh man, I failed. Oh, what should I do? It just means something stopped. All right, new things can be started. And you just keep going forth. Because really, it's honestly what we have as human beings is a consciousness that can attempt things and see its effect. So for me, it's like all those people who want to astral project in the New Age community and go magical realms of how their free will can do things. Guess what? It's all where whatever state of mind you are, as long as there's individualization, you're causing something to see its effect. And the cool thing about humanity is that you're a human being and you can cause something where you can see its collective effect. You know, that means regardless of who I thought the audience of these talks would be, I would start these talks just to see what the effect would be, just to see how the world engages the concept. Because I'm telling you, fear is forgetfulness. That's it. You're forgetting the bigger picture, so the fear is allowing you to stay in the smaller picture. Fear is really honestly like a curtain. You pull it aside and you see another complex reality working underneath. This is the thing about life, guys. If a person keeps this in mind, then you'll see why it's important to kind of pilot your attention, your free will. So, guys, in the chat section, AP says you're always rationalizing the feelings you have instead of habit you develop. Listen, it's not always. It's like when I give these talks, I have an intention, right? So what does that mean? That means like before I give the talk, the topic comes to my mind. This inner imagery comes to my mind, and I translate it into words, which becomes the topic. And then when I speak, I am looking at my own, how my attention evolves. You see, it's like this is the important thing of not taking a snapshot of a person and justifying their whole attitude and behavior based on that moment. I'm saying that we are dynamic creatures by nature. Now, it's not that it's, oh, let me tell you what it is. It's pretty much someone opening their eyes in a world and being like, what is this place? What am I? These two questions of just, I realized this was the thing, guys. I think the main, what made these kind of talks important for me was just this 0.0 whatever amount of zeros you want 1% chance that nobody knows what's going on and it's still unknown. That means there are still grand puzzles to be solved. Let me tell you something. There, in mathematics, there is something called the Millennium Questions. These are some of the most complex things that require proofs, mathematical equations and formulas that require proofs, you know, that it's theorems that require proofs, that it's one of those things that it's like whoever solves it gets $1,000,000. And strangely, there was this one guy who's like Andrew Wales solved Fermat's last theorem. And then there was this one other guy who solved this other thing, but this guy was such a mad mathematician that he didn't accept the prize because he was being staying honorable to his craft or whatever, you know. So the thing is for me is that it's like realizing there is a Rubik's cube no one has attempted to solve, and that's called an unknown universe. And so that the thing that inspired me is like rationalization is it depends on how much your world changes. If your world is still the same for you, you don't need to change it. You don't need to look for cracks in the mirror of your own perfection. You know, there's an incredible quote I just remembered from Rabindranath Tagore where he says, beauty is truth's smile as she, oh my God, what was the quote? Beauty is truth's smile as she sees her reflection in a perfect mirror. Oh my God, what was this quote? I feel I'm saying something off. Just a second, guys. Oh, there we go. Beauty is truth's smile when she beholds her own face in a perfect mirror. There we go. There we go. That is it. Beauty is truth's smile when she beholds her own face in a perfect mirror. That means some of the greater joys of this world and the pure lands that one may find within, which is the homeland of genius, it's a realization, self-realization. What does that mean? That means there is something happening before whatever you do, you know, and when you realize that thing that is happening before you were, your trust moves beyond a non-dual framework. So what does that mean? That means you realize your eyes are your whole moment, not just a part of it. And that's the thing I'm saying. The soul doesn't have an image. The soul is the overall value of sensory data's movement. And of course, I mean, I can say AP in the chat section, you say, is it a habit you developed? I don't know what it is. I think life, I realized after some point that it's moving at multiple speeds, and the type of story I tell myself is suggesting how much the character is rushing. So there came a moment in my life where I threw all stories away. And you, some would say, is I was living. This may sound strange, but as a naked mind. And when I say I was living as a naked mind, is that I have roamed preferencelessly a lot in this plane. And in that preferencelessness, there is just witness. And that witness, the truth of it is so instantaneous that it's like if a child doesn't doubt itself, gods will build a new civilization. It's a fascination for the unknown that is where excitement and beauty live. And I don't know how to say it. It is the endless source of poetry. It is reaching. I remember writing a book. Oh man, I should publish my stuff. Yeah. you know, this book was called The Inventors Sphere, and it was a book I had written for all the inventors of the world to come in the future generations. And in this book, I was saying there is this sphere, there is this state of being that once the person arrives, it is an endless pouring out, as if the valve of novelty is opened. And what it means that once the eyes no longer need to filter life in a certain value, the uncertainty gives you access to the infinite, to the endless. That sincere administration is a reversion, a remembrance that whatever eyes you had in your childhood were okay. That was a very profound moment for me when I realized, how do I know there is something wrong with this image of me? How do I know that what others have said to me is valid? And when I realized that, I was like, oh shit, all the times I could have just actually looked at the situation and had my own opinion, I was busy trying to copy paste myself into what the world wanted. And that was that the greatest thing I regret is that my mind did not roar earlier. But it's not a regret. It is just every story has its architecture, has its arc. So that's the thing. That means if when you realize kind of like your mind is your mind, and by the nature of that definition, it means your free will is the. So whoever you have thought you were, guess what? You can refresh the web browser of life, and it'll be a new page. And once you realize that, narratives can emerge. And what that means is Hollywood should be like, holy shit, why am I repeating all these stories when the world is filled with endless mysterious narratives? You see, the issue is not even when I was looking at kind of how filmmakers in the future, they're going to be the influencers of a lot of people's minds. And I was wondering, how are filmmakers in the future thinking? And you know what I realized? They are going to attempt an artistic, at some point you can say a percentage of filmmakers are going to attempt an artistic approach, and an artistic approach will mean a reflection of the culture of the time. And if the culture is mechanical, so what that means is future filmmakers are most likely going to keep making films about how the world is shitty, because they're going to try to say the truth of, hey guys, let's look at society, and when you look at society, it's shitty. And excuse my language, but I'm saying I should use much better words. I should say it's inefficient. And so what that means is, it's either the attention of people on this planet is going to the inefficient civilization, or to an efficient one. So what it is it's like we are like evolutionary creatures that stepped out of the environment and now are trying to reanimate, re-show the environment to each other differently as filmmakers of the future generations. So what I mean by that is, it's about what world we're willing to design, or in how every artistic expression is a finger pointing to some version of the earth. Honesty's choice is the greatest artistic rebellion. We have to re-evoke so many renaissances. I remember kind of writing that we should live in a world where renaissances are happening every day. That means every day we're celebrating our advancement as a civilization, not mourning a past that is no longer here to see our tears. And it's behavior, guys. I'm telling you, we should have a stoic approach to our or how human beings engage the economical system, because I'm telling you, behavior is so crucial. Life is not about just analysis, it is about rhythmic abidance, I find. That means your intelligence is not based on how much you see only, it's how you navigate in accordance to what you see. And your navigation is like, you got to trust your mind, like a horse you're riding into battle. And that battle is between how the conscious mind engages the unconscious again. So one can say, if Heraclitus said no man can step in the same river twice, and it is not the same man, and it is not the same river, so every day the conscious is attempting to reanimate the unconscious. Just like, again, Michelangelo said, I saw the angel in the stone and I set it free. The conscious mind is seeing the unconscious in a certain way and attempting to make it real. So we can say people have access to unreal imagery that they're trying to make real. How fascinating is it? That what people are doing in the day is like abstract images of what they of their own potential is becoming kinetic. I see it as, if we were to look at life as a designer, it's just expression, isn't it? It's just stuff moving. And it's our attention that begins to paint a story of the world. So I think an advanced civilization doesn't necessarily mean we are still language worshippers. Because after idol worship, just imagine back in the day, some person sees a chair and that person's like, this chair is God, and that person goes and tells other people, hey guys, I found God, it's this chair, look at its design, you know? And we suddenly see hundreds, like groups of people are like, suddenly, we see 10 people worshiping this chair, this object, as God, as truth, as the ultimate. And then some guy comes and is like, hey man, I need my chair back, what is this? And then the moment he tries to take his chair, everybody's like, no, this chair is a God, don't take our God away, you know and the guy's like, give me my chair back. And that's the whole point. After language worship, after object worship, as the object was taken from the hand of man, man saw the stuff that he had made into a god, and his mind was not God. What did he move on next? And when you look at the 6th century, it was an explosion. It was a nuclear explosion of subjective worship. For the first time, man began having a relationship with language. And so we started worshiping revelation. We started worshiping language, and programs began being injected into the mind of civilizations as generations passed on. That was the attempt, that was the great efforts of the 6th century, to try to personify the unknown through language, through symbol attribution. What does that mean? That means the words that man had created were the choice of the divine. And so we were ushered into an era of language worship. And believe it or not, till now, till 2020, we are still language worshippers. Because that is why there's violence on the street. That is why there are egos getting offended. And that is why civilization still, its shadow commands it, not its light. The Zen masters would say, if you want to climb a mountain, start at the top. And to start at the top means see an advanced civilization before you see an inferior one. See the superior before the inferior. The choice is yours. Honesty is its own road. AP asks in the chat section, have you practiced the opening of chakras? Oh, I'll tell you this. What if I told you all your chakras are occurring at once in one moment and they're being administered by your attention in one moment? How would you feel? Do you still feel there are 7 doors to unlock, or are you in one door, giant doorless room? You know? Because when my mentality went to my attention, that means I personally chose that I want to retain individual consciousness. So to retain individual consciousness and also being able to work with the abstract realms means that you have to see the room empty. If you don't see the room empty and you go into the unknown searching for truth, you're going to believe the first thing you find, and that's ignorance. That's transcendental ignorance. That means you've ran into a world that you haven't looked at first. So for me, when you look at the chakras, okay, so they say there's like 7 chakras, and then there's the 8th chakra, or some say, that is above your head, which is ultimately playfully all the chakras. Okay, so what does that mean? That means you have a body that is handling all your other bodies. Your whole body is handling your organs. Do you know? Now, I find the chakra, if we think about just even if, okay, let me entertain. Let's say you're a person, traditional person who's considering the concept of chakras. Okay, let's work with that. Chakras are seen as these wheels, are that are moving. These kind of, you can say, what's the name? Kind of those like uh, cylindrical cone-like. There are these wheels here. Let's say it like this. You know, there are these cones or wheels, you can say. Now, these chakras, which are seen as gates, and it's like when a person is, I don't know why they're using the metaphor of the snake going up the, what do you call it? Going up the, what do you call it? Going up the backbone, you know? You know, like that's some primitive imagery. The way I would see it is that literally conscious attention is navigating. And so for me, how it is that the gates are opened with not less consciousness, but more consciousness. More consciousness means access to more data. Access to more data means your sense of self will change to yourself. Your sense of self changing means the way you will express yourself now is different. So before the chakras opened, you have to wonder whose chakras are being opened. And you will be drawn towards an energetic reality too simple to define. You know, because I am telling you, the mind can write endless plays for itself and be a great actor, but there's more to life than a narrative, than the realms of language. You know, I found myself fighting with language. I have a love and hate relationship with it. In my childhood, I realized my decency was a rebellion of my free will against language that I felt by nature it was not aligned to me. Do you know? Because I am telling you, compared to many children born in the West, I was born in the East. And in the East, you can say they put a priority on discipline in regards to truth rather than freedom. In the West, Western enlightenment can be defined by its freedom. Eastern enlightenment can be defined by its discipline. You know, so you can say in different parts of the world, the way ideology is like a box going over people's head is different. For some people in theocratical societies, it becomes one where they don't really have freedom of thought, because if they deviate from what everyone accepts, they are the odd one. And a world that is trying, like I found it like this, that on some level it's savage, guys. The same savageness that Hitler had, and it was said that Hitler was like he didn't like, he was a neat freak. All the factories were wiped like as clean as when Hitler would go. I don't know. I remember seeing a YouTube video on this. But the idea was like that he was a neat freak, and his ideology of his inner realm was so blind to the outer realm that he was treating human life like bacteria. And that's the savageness. And when you look democratical society, it's like the boundary of the freedom of thought is like the same savageness of wanting to wipe bacteria. It's as if the freedom of people's mind is seen not as important as the freedom of the overall story. So realities are happening. I'm telling you, there is this world of ours is so multidimensional that there can be writers till the end of time. I find the chakras open once you abide by your true nature, and at that point, you won't even be caring about the chakras opening. You would just be basking in how the unknown is animating the next way the known moves. But I don't know, I have had moments where energetically I can say, like sometimes I've given talks, or like at the end of these talks, I haven't done it recently, but like a few years ago, I would have mantras at the end of the talk. You know, I would say like Om and, you know, different mantras. So in those moments, those are moments where I I kind of, how would I say it? It's like I try to hit one chord on a guitar and then try to see how the nature of the mind occurs. So for me, it's like I don't have too much of a linearized approach. It's as if it's too unknown for me to just have my own categorization of it be satisfactory. So I feel it's an unknown experience, not a conceptual development per se. So anyways, guys, I feel I've reached the end of this talk. The concept of the self of selves can be summed up in a quote by Rumi, where he says, "You're not just a drop in the ocean, you're the whole ocean in the drop." And when we realize that, then clarity is novelty will be welcomed, as if the seeds of genius will be sprouted, are ready to sprout. You see, it's like we need intelligence and then enough playfulness and silliness and tolerance to get by with the differences. You know, it's like when you wake up tomorrow, wonder really what is this world you're living in. Wonder why you are. Your eyes are open as an evolutionary part of it. Why you have journeyed for billions of years. Why you have, in some sense, the eyes of your ancestors dared to live for a tomorrow. And then you'll realize it's like you are the author of your how your vision can have meaning. So I'm telling you, it's like freedom before discipline activates one part of the brain hemisphere, and discipline before freedom activates the other part, and then you kind of become your mind, I find, becomes like the world that you trust your greatest intelligence tends to display itself in. And that's, I think, the best thing I can say about sincere administration. Find an honest world to live in, and then you'll realize the worlds that live within you will no longer be just subjective boundaries. It will not have just subjective boundaries. That means every conscious being is an explorer of the unconscious. And so we should have this grand hunter-gatherer tribe mentality. I remember giving a talk on it. I called it hunter-gatherers of the inner realms. We have to now see how our attention and minds perceives the world and find something we can bring back to the tribe from our inner realms, to the outer tribe, you know. So we have to advance communication, so the user of technology updates alongside external technologies that are exponentially growing. Pretty much I'm saying language has to evolve at such a faster speed than it is now. So anyways, thanks for tuning in, guys. Much blessings and namaste.